China and South Africa are eager to boost their bilateral relations to the highest level. Trade volume between Pretoria and Beijing has grown in leaps and bounds from less than 1 billion rand in 1998 to over 600 billion rand in 2022. Now, as China gears up to have the China International Import Expo in Shanghai later this year, a number of South African companies are keen to narrow the trade deficit that exists in Beijing's favor. The two countries are members of BRICS, FOCAC and G20, as well as other key international platforms that they advocate for the reforms of global institutions.
China and South Africa established diplomatic ties in 1998. During the past 26 years, our bilateral relations have achieved leapfrog development from partnership, strategic partnership, to currently comprehensive strategic partnership. Just as concluded by Chinese President Xi Jinping, through the testing of time, China and South Africa has forged a profound friendship.
It's very core to our partnership agreement with the ICBC. We set up these agreements every 5 years, and core to that, and actually acknowledged by President Xi Jinping as part of the commitments for FOCAC and as BRICS, our agreement with them for the next 5 years incorporated in that. And this is just one of the aspects of that agreement. So we are really in the work and making sure that as private sector we are pulling our clients into the opportunity and other partners that we can to really bring these commitments to practicality into life.
Huge market, and we're looking to get into the next phase of our relationship with China. As you know, yes, we are trading quite a bit with China. We've seen an improvement in even what we export to China, but the issue is the composition of those exports. It's still primarily commodities, agricultural commodities and minerals. We're looking to have more value-added products from South Africa.
Right, let's bring in some analysis. We're joined by Professor David Monyae, who's the Director of the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg. A very good evening to you, Professor. Thank you so much for your time. Trade between China and South Africa has grown exponentially over the last 2.5 decades or so. We know that the relationship between Beijing and South Africa has over the last 26 years extended much beyond matters of the economy. Exactly how much has it evolved?
I think we've seen growth in a number of areas. It has moved from your high political business to people. I think we have seen a number of South Africans, at the very ordinary people, getting into China, and Chinese also getting into South Africa, and more of South African students getting into Chinese universities. And that growth, I think we're going to see near future expanding to sport, to other joint ventures that are needed, particularly on issues of beneficiations. I think to expand that trade in South Africa's favor, it is important that South Africa improves on the raw material and ensure that we take advantage of a huge market in China. The market itself in China is so sophisticated. It is more than 400 million middle class in China, much larger than the population of the United States. And we're competing with so many other countries, fellow African countries, Asia countries, Latin America, all targeting the very same market. Therefore, I think South Africa need to expand and ensure that quality goods are getting into China.
Yeah, and we know that this bond between South Africa and China, which continues to reflect in the strong ties, of course, bears some historical significance. Now, with China being an important investor in South Africa, it's more so South Africa's emerging local infrastructure and development projects. What opportunities exist for South African businesses, those, of course, in China's expanding market? I mean, you touched briefly on it, but how big is the scope?
It is quite huge. And recently, President Xi Jinping has mentioned and added a very important element that in South Africa and across the African continent, we're still far behind the issue of technology, which he called productive force, a new quality productive force, which is technology. China is gaining ground, as you see, with electrical vehicles that getting into our market, and a huge number of Chinese vehicles. Our roads are changing on a daily basis. We have vehicles, the usual from Japan, Germany, and others, but we are seeing increased number of new products that are coming from China. But it is important for South Africa, particularly the state-owned enterprises, to ensure that they compete with Chinese SOEs on the African continent. But in some instances, there is a need to have joint ventures, as we have seen and alluded by Standard Bank, quite a huge deal that they signed, and which is very productive across the African continent.
Both South Africa and China place very high value on their bilateral trade relationship. I mean, China is gearing up very soon to have its International Import Expo in Shanghai later this year. What opportunities do you think exist for South African businesses, as they have now expressed a very keen interest to narrow the trade deficits that exist in Beijing's favor?
I think it's a golden opportunity to showcase South African products on this expo show in Shanghai. I had a privilege of attending one of these shows. I think that this is a venue in which South African companies will interact with their counterparts in China, and more importantly, with Chinese consumers will come and see. And in that venue, I think we're going to see other African countries, Latin America and Asia, also showcasing. So it is important that those who are preparing to go to this expo do their work and ensure that we do put the very best that we produce in agricultural sector, mining, and so many other areas, including the blue economy. I think there is a need to ensure that we add value to what we sell in China, and ensure that we also compete in technology.
So with China being South Africa's largest trading partner, we know the two countries are members of BRICS, G20, FOCAC, and other key international platforms. How much muscle do these platforms offer both countries in their efforts to advocate for reforms of the global institutions?
Very critical. China, as you are aware, is a member of the United Nations Security Council. There are some issues that South Africa would like to advance within the UN system, and relying on China to advance South Africa's and Africa's interests, it's quite important. But as also both China and South Africa members of BRICS, it is important that China could assist Africa, and with new members, Ethiopia and Egypt, having joined BRICS, there is a golden opportunity, for instance, to have China negotiate the tension between Ethiopia and Egypt over the dam to be eased up. I think South Africa can play that role. On the question of Western Sahara, I think China could do the best it can to assist South Africa and the continent to resolve some of the major conflicts on the continent in the DRC, as what China has done in the Gulf states. I think you have seen China negotiating Iran and Saudi Arabia and coming to a conclusion of the conflict between those two countries, and they are all BRICS members as we speak. Other platforms such as G20 on question of climate change, it's quite important. And the forthcoming Forum on China Cooperation, China-Africa Cooperation, it's yet another platform in which South Africa could work hand in hand with China to boost trade, and far beyond that, deal with issues of strengthening multilateralism in favor of Africa's development.
Perhaps very, very lastly, before we let you go, let's go back to talk about some of the value-added products that would be beneficial for South African businesses to ensure that they expose the Chinese market to. What are consumers in China constantly looking for? And of course, the constant supply of these essential products, and ones which won't become the target of political tensions, for instance. What is it specifically that will set South Africa apart? You talk about the massive competition, but the market is also massive for South Africa to take advantage of.
Indeed, I think South Africa is doing extremely well when it comes to agricultural products. And I think the Chinese, they need more beef, of which I do not think we have the capacity. However, I think we can do more in selling mangoes, bananas, and quite a number of other agricultural products. But ensuring that these products do not go to China in their raw material format. We need to ensure that we add value to improve, to ensure that we increase employment in South Africa, as well as ensure that we benefit more in terms of selling these products. Another area is minerals. I think Chinese are more interested in strategic minerals that South Africa have. Yet again, there is a need for South Africa to work extremely hard to beneficiate these strategic minerals to benefit the country and ensure that the trade between South Africa and China is equal, fair, and is a win-win in the truest sense of the word.